So let's talk about dividing fractions. If you have a whole number, okay, and we're dividing fractions, so let's take 15 divided by 1/3. So I'm taking a whole number and I'm dividing it up. So what we're looking for in this situation is if you have 15 of something, ooh, should have picked a smaller number. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay, so I have 15 of something, and I'm dividing it up into 1/3 pieces. Okay, so I'm dividing it up. So I'm going to divide it into 1/3 pieces. So here's my 1/3 pieces. So if we think about this, if I was just going to take 1 and divide it by 1/3, well, how many thirds go into 1? Well, there'd be 3. So right down here, if I have 1 whole, there'd be 3. 1, 2, 3. So my answer would be 3. But in this case, I have 15 times that amount. I have 15 wholes that I'm breaking into 3. So I get 3 for each of these. So I can actually just do 15 times 3. That gets me 45. Now, a lot of people think about this a little bit differently. And we say something like this. If we have something like 12, and maybe I'm dividing it by a half. Okay, I want to know how many halves go into 12. Well, dividing by half is actually the same thing as multiplying by 2, right? Because if I want to know how many 1/2s, again, if I want to know 1 divided by a half, I know that a half will go into 1 2 times, and now I'm doing that 12 times. So I can do 12 times. So a lot of people talk about how when you divide fractions, you can multiply by the reciprocal. And the reciprocal is basically that number flipped over. It's the number that it's when I flip this over, if I just multiply across. So for example, let's do one that maybe is a little bit uglier, like 6 divided by 2/5. Yee. So what I can do in this case is I can say, similarly, I can say, well, if I wanted to flip this over, I could say, well, 6, right, times 5 divided by 2. Because I'm going to, in this case, like if I had 2/5, right, if I did 1 divided by 2/5, like I was just doing in that last example, there'd be a little bit more than 2, right, 2/5 that go into 1 whole. So in this case, if you wanted to look at it that way, you would say, well, there'd actually be times 5 over 2. There'd actually be 2.5. It'd go in 2.5 times. And let's draw a little picture so we can kind of see that. So here's my 1, and I want to know how many 2/5 are in there. So here's a 5th. 2, 3, 4, 5. How many 2/5? Well, here's 1 2/5. Here's another 2/5. But I can't make another 2/5. I only have half of another 2/5. So that's why there ends up being 2.5 in each one. But then I have to multiply that by 6 because there's going to be 6 of these pictures. So that's how we would end up dividing fractions. So you can either multiply by that reciprocal like I did here. You could draw a picture and try to pull out as many as you can from your picture.